I had been warned about him. From the first day I entered the gleaming glass tower of Khalifa Studios, Nigeria, I had been warned, don't look him in the eye. Don't talk to him unless spoken to. And don't even dream of getting on his bad side. Emma, they weren't talking about some distant executive. They meant the man whose name was engraved on the marble wall in the lobby. Kazimir Khalifa, billionaire, CEO, movie mogul, ruthless king of the Lagos entertainment world. He ruled this empire with a single look, the kind that froze the blood of seasoned directors and sent ambitious producers scurrying. I'd heard the whispers. He hadn't smiled since his wife's tragic passing 2 years ago. He kept everyone at a distance, and not a single woman had come near him since. Which was fine by me. I was just a lowly receptionist, Hazel, 24, with zero experience in this high-stakes world. I planned to keep my head down, type memos, and survive my probation period. But Lagos had other plans. That morning, I arrived early, 7:30 a.m., sharp heels clicking nervously on the marble floor as I crossed the lobby. By 9 a.m., my desk was piled with casting calls and script packets. I was halfway through sorting them when the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. The entire floor seemed to go still. Conversations halted mid-sentence. A presence entered the room, not loud, not dramatic, but utterly commanding. Kazimir Khalifa. In a tailored black suit, crisp white shirt, no tie. The expensive watch gleaming on his wrist was worth more than my entire salary for the year. But it wasn't the suit that made my breath catch. It was him. Tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp cheekbones and a sculpted jawline. Skin the rich hue of dark coffee, black eyes cold as steel, and an aura that pressed against your chest and made you forget how to breathe. I had never understood the fear people spoke of until that moment. Every eye on the floor was trained downward, except mine. I looked up just for a second and met his gaze. That was my mistake. His eyes locked onto mine, sharp as a blade. I felt pinned, exposed like a mouse caught by a hawk. Is there a problem, miss? His voice cut across the room, low and ice cold. I shot to my feet. No, sir. Hazel Okunwa. A single step forward. I felt it in my bones. Then why, he said softly, dangerously, are you staring at me instead of doing your job? Heat flooded my cheeks. I wasn't. Be mindful. His words snapped like a whip. This is not a playground. He turned away, walking toward his glass-walled corner office. The silence on the floor remained, thick and suffocating. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. My fingers trembled as I returned to my seat. Now I understood. This was why people were terrified of him. Not because he shouted, but because he didn't need to. One look, one word. That was enough. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I barely dared to breathe each time Kazimir emerged from his office, tall, cold, untouchable. When I slipped into the restroom, I overheard 2 producers whispering, "He's been like this since Amara died. I heard the boy's nanny quit again last night. Poor child. No one can get near him. No one dares." I froze in place. The boy, his son, Kevin Khalifa, born after his mother's death, if the office gossip was true. The child no one ever saw. Before I could make sense of it, my phone buzzed. Meeting boardroom A, 8 a.m. tomorrow. Sender, executive office. I swallowed hard. What meeting? I wasn't an executive. But no one ignored a summons from the CEO's office. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face cold, unreadable, his voice sharp with command. The power in that one moment when he spoke in my name. I kept hearing the words, "The nanny quit again last night. No one dares." What could tomorrow's meeting possibly mean? At exactly 7:50 a.m. the next morning, I was standing outside boardroom A, nerves jangling. The glass door swung open at 8 o'clock on the dot. Kazimir Khalifa stood there in another impeccably tailored suit, eyes sweeping over me with cool appraisal. "Miss Okonwa, come in." I stepped inside, my breath catching. The room was empty, no executives, no board members, just him. The door shut behind me with a soft click. Kazimir moved to the head of the table and sat. His gaze never left mine. "You live in Ikoyi, correct?" he asked without preamble. I blinked. "Yes, sir. My residence is in Banana Island. You will report there tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. sharp." I swallowed. "Sir, for what purpose?" His eyes hardened. "My son's nanny resigned," he said, voice flat. "You will take her place." I gasped. "Sir, I'm not qualified. You were hired to serve this company. You will serve where needed. I have no time for incompetence or excuses." The blood drained from my face. "But, sir, you will report tomorrow," he said again, tone brooking no argument. "That is all." He rose, already dismissing me. My heart pounded painfully in my chest. I struggled to find words, but none came. I turned and left, legs shaking beneath me. As I stumbled back to my desk, the office buzzed with quiet curiosity. No one asked, no one needed to. They had seen the summons. They had seen the look on my face. By noon, everyone would know Hazel Okano had been called into the lion's den and survived barely. But what I didn't know, was that my life was about to change in ways I could never have imagined. The next morning dawned cool and gray. I barely slept the night before. My mind was spinning with questions. How had my life flipped so fast? 1 minute, I was a simple receptionist, blending into the office halls. The next, I was ordered no, commanded to become the nanny of Kazimir Khalifa, son of the most powerful and feared man in the Lagos entertainment industry. I stood in front of my modest wardrobe, staring at my clothes in disbelief. What did one even wear to nanny duty at a Banana Island mansion? I settled on a simple blue blouse and black slacks, pulling my hair into a low ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry. I didn't want to give Kazimir Khalifa any reason to glare at me again. By 6:30 a.m., I was in a cab, heart thumping against my ribs. We cruised down the bridge, crossing into the polished gates of Banana Island, the playground of the ultra-rich. I'd only ever seen this place in magazines or on Instagram. Wide boulevards, luxury cars gliding past, villas with private docks and gleaming glass facades. And soon enough, the cab slowed in front of a sprawling estate, its towering iron gates guarded by men in dark uniforms. I showed them my ID. The guards exchanged a glance, checked a list, then opened the gates with a polite nod. The cab pulled into a circular driveway lined with marble tiles and lush greenery. The house itself looked like something out of an architectural dream. 3 stories, ivory walls, tall windows gleaming under the early morning light. I paid the cab, stepped out, and adjusted my blouse. Showtime. The heavy oak door opened before I could knock. A tall, elegant woman greeted me, the housekeeper, dressed in a crisp gray uniform. "You are Miss Hazel?" she asked. "Yes, Ma." She gave a polite smile, though her eyes studied me keenly. "Come in. Master Kevin is awake." The marble foyer opened into a grand hallway. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead. A sweeping staircase led up to the second floor. Every surface gleamed. The air smelled faintly of lilies and expensive polish. I followed her in, trying to keep my nerves in check. "You'll be staying in the guest wing," she said briskly. "Mr. Khalifa prefers that you remain on the property, full-time for now." Full-time? I blinked. That detail hadn't exactly been mentioned. But then again, Kazimir Khalifa didn't ask. He ordered. "The boys' meals, naps, and activities are on a strict schedule. You'll find everything written down in the nursery." We reached a sunlit corridor lined with white-framed photographs, all black and white shots of Lagos landmarks. At the end, the housekeeper paused and lowered her voice. "One more thing. Do not disturb Mr. Khalifa unless summoned." I swallowed. Understood. She opened the door to the nursery and gestured me in. The room was beautiful, walls painted soft gray, shelves filled with books and plush toys. And in the center of it all, sitting cross-legged on a thick playmat, was Kazimir Khalifa. He was too, just as I'd heard. A small boy with soft curls, big dark eyes, and a solemn little face. For a moment, he simply looked at me, wary and quiet. I knelt slowly, offering a gentle smile. "Hi there, Kevin. I'm Hazel." He blinked, watching me, then picked up a small toy car and pushed it across the mat. I stayed still, giving him space. He looked so tiny in this vast house, so alone. I couldn't imagine what it must be like, growing up without a mother, barely knowing a father who ruled the world but kept his distance. The morning passed in a blur. I followed the housekeeper's schedule as best I could: bottle feeding, story time, soft nursery songs on the speaker. Kevin remained mostly quiet, but slowly after an hour or so, he began to glance my way, then crawl closer, toy in hand. When I finally coaxed a tiny smile from him after a silly game of peekaboo, my heart melted. Beneath that sad little face was a sweet, curious child who just needed a little warmth. Late afternoon, after Kevin's nap, I ventured into the kitchen to grab a glass of water. That's when I heard footsteps, cold, sharp, measured. Kazimir Khalifa entered the room, dressed in another sleek, dark suit, the faintest shadow of stubble on his jaw. I froze mid-step. Our eyes met. His gaze raked over me, cool and unreadable. "Miss Okonwa," he said. "How is the boy?" He's doing fine, sir. We rayed together earlier. He's napping now." A flicker of something passed in his eyes, approval perhaps, or simply relief. "Good. You will continue." "Yes, sir." He moved past me, pouring himself a glass of water with precise movements. Every inch of this man radiated control, power. Yet for a moment, just a heartbeat, I caught a shadow in his gaze. A flicker of exhaustion. Maybe grief. But just as quickly, the cold mask returned. "You will report to the housekeeper for any additional instructions," he said curtly. "If you need anything, ask her, not me." "Of course, sir." I watched as he strode out of the kitchen, tall and distant, the air seeming to shift in his wake. That night, I sat alone in the guest room, a luxurious suite with cream silk sheets and a balcony overlooking the garden. I barely touched the dinner the staff had prepared. Instead, I stared out at the Lagos skyline in the distance, wondering how I had ended up here. Hazel Okonwa, the girl from a modest Ikoyi flat, now nanny to the son of one of Nigeria's richest, most terrifying men. And somehow, beneath the fear, a strange curiosity stirred inside me. About the boy, about the man, about the secrets that seemed to echo through these marble halls. One thing was certain. This was not going to be a simple job. And somehow, I wasn't sure I wanted it to be. By the third day, I had fallen into a careful rhythm at the Khalifa estate. Wake by 6 a.m., tend to Kevin's breakfast. Morning playtime, afternoon nap, evening storybooks. And in between, tiptoe around the mansion like a mouse in a lion's den. Because no matter how bright the sunlit corridors were, no matter how elegantly the gardens bloomed outside, this house felt cold. Not because of the marble or the high ceilings, but because of him. Kazimir Khalifa, the man who haunted every hallway, every breath. You felt his presence before you saw him, sharp as glass, heavy as a storm cloud. And though I rarely glimpsed him directly, when I did, my heart would lurch with a mix of fear and something else I didn't want to name. It was on that third morning, while Kevin was happily stacking colorful blocks in the nursery, that I finally gathered the courage to ask the housekeeper, "Has Mr. Khalifa always been like this?" She paused mid-fold, her hands smoothing a tiny onesie. "Since the madam passed," she said softly, "everything changed." I swallowed. I had heard the whispers in the office, but hearing it here in the place where Amara Khalifa had once lived made it feel more real. "He loved her deeply," the housekeeper continued. "After her death, the master shut himself away. No one can reach him." I looked toward the nursery window, where the garden swayed in the breeze. And the boy sitting quietly before me, Kevin, growing up in this cold, lonely house. My heart ached for him. Later that afternoon, the housekeeper informed me that Kevin's father would be working from home, which meant be alert, be invisible, do not disturb. I took Kevin out to the garden for playtime, a sprawling, manicured lawn with neatly trimmed hedges and a small stone fountain. The boy giggled as he chased butterflies across the grass, his little feet pattering over the soft earth. I watched him, smiling to myself. Here, in the open air, away from the heavy silences of the house, Kevin came alive. He laughed, he squealed. He even tugged playfully at my sleeve when he wanted me to chase him. It was the first time I'd heard real joy in his voice, and that sound so pure, so innocent, made my heart swell. I didn't hear the footsteps behind me. Not until a deep, quiet voice said, "You've done well with him." I whirled around. Kazimir stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, dark eyes unreadable. In the bright garden light, he looked devastating, tall, lean, suit jacket tossed casually over one shoulder. My throat went dry. Thank you, sir," I stammered. He studied me for a long moment. "I didn't expect this," he said softly. Kevin's smiling, laughing. There was something strange in his tone, surprise, perhaps even regret. I dared to glance at his face. In that unguarded second, I saw it. The grief beneath the surface, the exhaustion, the walls he held up so tightly around himself. And suddenly I understood why this house felt so cold. Because the man who lived in it was frozen from the inside out. Kevin toddled up then, arms raised for me to pick him up. I scooped him into my arms, smiling down at his chubby face. Kazimir watched us silent, unreadable. For a heartbeat, our eyes locked. And in that look, something shifted, a flicker of awareness. I felt it in my stomach, warm, unsettling. I tore my gaze away quickly. "I'll take him in for lunch, sir." Kazimir nodded once. "Carry on." He turned, walking back toward the house, leaving me breathless and confused. That evening, after Kevin had been bathed and tucked in, I lingered on the balcony of my room, staring out at the glittering skyline of Lagos. The breeze ruffled my hair as I hugged my arms around myself. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment in the garden, the way Kazimir's eyes had softened just for a second. Was it loneliness, guilt, or something else entirely? I didn't know. But beneath my nerves, beneath the fear, something strange was blooming inside me. A pull toward the boy, toward the man. And that terrified me most of all. It was a Friday night when the shift in the air began. The household was quiet, more so than usual. Kevin had fallen asleep early, worn out from an afternoon of laughter in the garden. The housekeeper and other staff had retired to their quarters. I lingered in the nursery for a while longer, smoothing the blankets around Kevin's tiny frame. His soft curls gleamed in the dim light, his little breaths slow and even. Peaceful. I envied him. Because while he slept soundly, my mind was restless. Ever since that moment in the garden, I couldn't stop thinking about Kazimir, the way his gaze had lingered, the sound of his voice low, deep, tinged with something I couldn't quite name. It was madness, I told myself, foolish, dangerous. This was my boss, the most powerful man in the Nigerian film industry, a widower, a grieving father. And me? A simple receptionist turned nanny with no business thinking about him this way. Around 10 p.m., I stepped quietly down to the kitchen, craving a cup of tea to steady my nerves. The house was dim, the chandeliers turned low. A soft rain pattered against the tall windows, the rhythmic sound adding to the quiet stillness. I padded barefoot across the marble floor and reached for the kettle, only to freeze as a shadow moved behind me. I turned, swiftly, heart leaping into my throat. Kazimir stood there. No suit jacket this time, just a crisp white shirt, open at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong, veined forearms. His dark eyes glinted beneath the dim lights, unreadable. Could sleep? His voice was low, almost softer than usual. I swallowed. No, sir. Just making tea. He moved toward the counter, pouring himself a glass of scotch from the decanter. His movements were smooth, almost casual. But there was a tension in the air, subtle, crackling. Kevin seems happier, he said after a moment, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. I exhaled slowly. He's a wonderful boy, sir. He just needed someone to spend time with him. Kazimir's gaze flicked toward me. You've been good with him. That small compliment, simple, almost offhand, sent warmth flooding through me. Thank you, I whispered. We stood in silence for a beat, the rain tapping softly against the glass. Then, without warning, he spoke again, voice rougher this time. This house wasn't always like this. I blinked. He rarely spoke, never about personal things. But tonight, something in him seemed different. Before Amara died, he continued, his jaw tight. It was warmer, livelier. My heart ached for him. I'm sure it was, sir, I said softly. He downed the scotch in one slow swallow. His fingers tightened around the glass. I failed them, he murmured, voice thick. Her, the boy. I wanted to say something, anything to ease the grief I heard beneath those words. But before I could, Kazimir stepped closer. Too close. My breath caught. His gaze locked onto my dark, intense burning. You shouldn't be afraid of me, Hazel, he said quietly. Everyone else is, but you look at me differently. My pulse pounded wildly. Before I could speak, his hand lifted warm and strong to brush a stray curl from my cheek. The contact sent a jolt through me, leaving me breathless. And in that charged moment, the space between us disappeared. I didn't know who moved first. 1 second, we were standing apart, two lonely souls in a too large house. The next, his mouth was on mine. Hot, demanding, consuming. I gasped, my hands flying to his chest, but not to push him away. To hold on, because the moment his lips touched mine, something inside me shattered the loneliness, the restraint, the fear. Gone. Kazimir kissed like a man starved, like a man drowning, and I, helpless, kissed him back with everything I had. When his hand slid down to grip my waist, pulling me flush against him, I whimpered softly against his mouth. And when he deepened the kiss, rougher now, hungrier, a low moan escaped me. Somehow, in a blur of heat and need, we stumbled back toward the grand staircase. He scooped me into his arms with startling strength, carrying me up as if I weighed nothing. I barely noticed the rain pounding harder outside, or the faint, distant roll of thunder. All I felt was him, the man beneath the suits, the man behind the cold mask, raw, grieving, desperate. And when we reached his bedroom, a dark, masculine space filled with shadows and silk, the last threads of control snapped. Clothes fell away. I moaned then, tilting my head back to give him better access. His hands clamped on my waist, then moved. One going to cut my rear, the other sliding between us. This moment, when it was him and me, and nothing between our bodies. His tongue scraped the roof of my mouth as he dragged a finger down the center of me, and I gasped, my back arching. Hazel, he said against my lips. My name like a prayer more devout than any anthe had offered up to the cauldron on that dark solstice morning. His tongue swept my mouth again, in time to the finger that he slipped inside of me. My hips undulated, demanding more, craving the fullness of him, and his growl reverberated in my chest as he added another finger. I moved on him. Lightning lashed through my veins, and my focus narrowed to his fingers, his mouth, his body on mine. His palm pushed against the bundle of nerves at the apex of my thighs, and I groaned his name as I shattered. His mouth worshipped every inch of my skin, leaving a burning trail of desire. His voice, rough, hoarse, murmured my name again and again, as if trying to anchor himself in something real. And me? I gave myself to him completely. No doubts, no regrets. That night, we weren't CEO and nanny. We weren't billionaire and employee. We were just two broken people, finding a moment of solace in each other's arms. Hours later, as dawn began to creep through the curtains, I lay tangled in the sheets, heart racing, breath unsteady. Kazimir slept beside me, one strong arm draped possessively around my waist, his face finally soft, unguarded. And though my body ached with exhaustion, my mind swirled with questions. What had we done? What would this mean come morning? Would he regret it? I closed my eyes, trying in vain to calm my pounding heart. Because one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. Kazimir woke to an empty bed. The soft morning light streamed through the tall windows of his bedroom, casting faint gold patterns across the rumpled sheets. But Hazel was gone. No gentle breath beside him. No trace of her warmth left in the space where she had slept. For a moment he lay still, one arm resting across the cool sheets, his dark eyes staring up at the ceiling. And then the memories of the night before flooded back in sharp, vivid detail. Her soft gasps, her trembling fingers gripping his shoulders, her whispered moans of his name as he buried himself deep inside her. Kazimir closed his eyes, dragging a rough hand through his hair. What the hell had he done? He sat up slowly, letting the sheet fall away from his bare chest. His mind spun not with regret, but with confusion. How had it come to this? When he had first seen her standing at the reception desk in his Lagos tower, something in him had jolted awake. It had caught him off guard. She wasn't the most glamorous woman in the building. No polished socialite, no designer-clad vixen. She was calm, collected, and there was a rare, understated beauty in the way she held herself, a quiet strength that had drawn his gaze before he even realized it. He hadn't intended to notice her that day. He hadn't intended to speak to her. But when she looked up at him, with those wide, startled eyes unflinching, it had struck something deep inside him. And from that moment, something had shifted. At first, he told himself it was curiosity, nothing more. He needed someone for Kevin, someone dependable, someone who wouldn't flee like the others. That's why he'd ordered her to become the boy's nanny. It was not about her, or so he told himself. But the more he saw her in his home, her soft voice soothing Kevin, her laughter echoing through rooms that had long been silent, the more the walls around his heart began to crack. And last night, God help him, he hadn't meant for that to happen. He hadn't meant to take her virginity, he now realized. A sharp ache pulsed in his chest. He hadn't known, couldn't have known, but the truth of it had been written in her body, her cries, her softness beneath him. She had been untouched, innocent, and now changed. Because of him. Kazimir stood, pulling on a pair of dark lounge pants, muscles taut beneath his skin. He poured himself a glass of water and stared out over the gardens. After Amara died, he had closed off that part of himself, locked it away so deeply he thought it would never surface again. No woman had stirred even a flicker of desire in him since that day. Until her, Hazel. He had been drawn to her in ways that defied logic, an intensity he couldn't explain, couldn't control. He had tried to bury it, ignore it, resist it. But as he now knew, emotion does not care. And last night, that truth had come crashing down upon them both. Downstairs, the house was stirring to life. The housekeeper greeted him in the hall, her expression carefully neutral. "Miss Hazel left early this morning, sir," she informed him. "She said she needed air." Kazimir's jaw clenched. "Did she say if she would return?" The housekeeper hesitated. "No, sir." Meanwhile, across the island, Hazel sat in her small studio apartment, knees pulled to her chest. Her heart still pounded from the events of the night before. She could still feel his touch, his mouth, the overwhelming heat of his body. It hadn't been a mistake, not in her heart, but it had changed everything. She wasn't foolish. She knew the power dynamics at play. He was her boss, a billionaire widower with the world at his feet. And she? just a girl hired to care for his son. And now, something inside her was different, changed. At first, she thought it was the stress, the sleepless night, the emotional whirlwind. But after 2 weeks, small signs began to creep in. A wave of nausea while folding Kevin's clothes, a dizzy spell while preparing his lunch, a sudden aversion to the scent of coffee, something she'd loved only weeks before. Hazel tried to ignore it, to push the thought away. But deep down, a terrible, beautiful truth began to take shape. She was late, painfully late. With trembling fingers, Hazel booked an appointment at a discreet private clinic in Ikuyai. 2 days later, she sat in a quiet examination room, heart pounding in her chest. The doctor smiled gently as he applied the cool gel to her belly, guiding the ultrasound wand over her skin. Oh, moments later, the faint flicker of a heartbeat appeared on the screen. Then another. And then a third. Hazel gasped. The doctor gave a small, reassuring smile. "Congratulations, Miss Okanwa," he said softly. "You're carrying triplets." Her breath caught. Triplets. Her vision blurred as tears filled her eyes. She was carrying Kazimir Khalifa's children. That evening, Hazel stood before her mirror, hands resting lightly over her still flat stomach. How would she tell him? Would he be angry? Cold? Would he think she had planned this? Or worse, would he send her away? Her heart twisted painfully at the thought. Not for herself, but for Kevin, and for the man she had foolishly, desperately begun to love. Kazimir Khalifa. Hazel had expected it. The distance, the silence. It was written in his eyes the morning after, though she hadn't waited long enough to see him again. She had left before dawn, slipping quietly from the mansion, her heart bruised, but her mind clear. Kazimir Khalifa was not the kind of man who invited softness into his life. What had happened between them? It would mean nothing to him. And she, foolish girl that she was, would do well to remember that. But no amount of cold reasoning could dull the ache in her chest. Because though she had braced for it, the reality of his silence cut deeper than she had imagined. She stayed away. At first 1 day, then 2, then a week. No word from him, no message. And deep down she knew it was his way of drawing the line. What had happened between them was a mistake. It would never be spoken of. It would never happen again. Her job, her place in his world, gone, as if it had never existed. But what neither of them expected, what neither had accounted for, was Kevin. The little boy who had grown used to her soft voice, her warm arms. The boy whose laughter had once echoed through the cold marble halls. Now, he noticed. That first day he toddled into the nursery, toy lion in hand, searching. "Hazel?" he asked in his tiny voice. The housekeeper had tried her best, offering gentle distractions. "She's busy today, sweetheart." But the second day, Kevin asked again. And the third. By the end of the week, his bright eyes had dimmed, his laughter faded. Meals were left unfinished. Playtime was met with soft whimpers instead of giggles. The little boy became quiet, withdrawn. The household staff noticed. The housekeeper tried everything. But there was only one name on Kevin's lips, whispered in the night, in his sleep. Hazel. In her tiny apartment, Hazel felt it all. The silence, the loneliness. The absence of Kevin's sweet smile, his little hugs, the way he would tug on her sleeve when he wanted to play. She lay curled on her couch, one hand over her still flat stomach, heart aching in ways she couldn't explain. She missed him, more than she thought possible. And knowing he was sad, knowing he was looking for her, made it all so much worse. But going back, she couldn't. Not now. Not with everything so uncertain. Not with the secret growing inside her. Kazimir had made his feelings clear through his silence. He would never want this. Never want her. At the mansion, Kazimir noticed the change in his son, though he tried not to. Tried to bury himself in endless work, scripts, calls, board meetings, anything to keep from thinking about her. But Kevin's growing sadness was impossible to ignore. The boy barely spoke, barely smiled, At night, he whimpered in his sleep, soft, heart-wrenching sounds that pierced the silence of the house. And in the still hours before dawn, Kazimir would stand in the nursery doorway, fists clenched, jaw tight, haunted by the emptiness she had left behind, haunted by the truth he refused to face. Emotion does not care. He had known that the moment he touched her, when control slipped through his fingers, and raw, desperate need had taken over. But now every room felt colder. Every moment stretched long and hollow. And though he told himself this was what he wanted, this distance, this return to order, the ache in his chest said otherwise. Hazel wiped her tears and forced herself out of bed. She couldn't live like this, hiding away in fear and shame. For Kevin, for the life growing inside her, she would have to face him. Soon. But how? And with what words? Her heart twisted painfully at the thought. Hazel had never known a week could feel so long. Each day stretched endlessly inside her tiny apartment, the minutes marked by nausea, headaches, and a relentless ache in her heart. She missed Kevin. She missed the bright smile that had once lit up her mornings, the way his tiny hands would reach for her when he wanted comfort. And though she tried to bury it, she missed him too. Kazimir, the man who had taken her breath, her heart, and now, without knowing, her future. 2 weeks after her first appointment, Hazel found herself sitting in the plush waiting room of one of Lagos's top private hospitals alone, trembling and barely able to breathe. This was her follow-up scan, the one that would confirm everything. Her fingers twisted nervously in her lap as she waited, her mind racing with thoughts of the night that had changed everything. She hadn't heard from him since. Not a word. And yet here she was, carrying not just a piece of him, but 3. Miss Okanwa? She looked up to see the kind-faced sonographer smiling gently. This way, please. Hazel rose on shaky legs and followed her into the dim, quiet room. The cool gel on her stomach made her flinch slightly. The wand moved over her skin, and moments later, there they were. Tiny flickers on the screen. Tiny, undeniable heartbeats. 3 of them. The sonographer smiled again. Everything looks strong, Miss Okanwa. Your triplets are developing well. Hazel's breath caught. Triplets. Even though she had heard it before, seeing them now real and alive brought a rush of overwhelming emotion. Tears filled her eyes as she stared at the screen. How had her life changed so completely in just a few weeks? Later in the cab ride home, Hazel sat in stunned silence, one hand resting protectively over her stomach. The truth was undeniable now. She was carrying Kazimir Khalifa's children. And no matter how terrifying the thought of facing him was, she knew she couldn't hide this forever. He deserved to know. Kevin deserved to know. And the tiny lives growing inside her deserved more than secrecy. That night, Hazel sat alone in her apartment, staring at the framed photo of her late mother on the small side table. "Mama," she whispered, voice trembling. "What do I do?" But the only answer was the soft hum of the city outside her window. Meanwhile, across Banana Island, Kazimir sat in his study, whiskey glass untouched on the desk beside him. His mind wasn't on the latest contracts or the stack of unread scripts. It was on her, Hazel, and the crushing silence that had followed that night. He hadn't meant to drive her away. But after waking alone, after replaying every moment in his head, he had done the only thing he knew how. Pulled back, shut down. Walls, always walls. But it hadn't worked. Because even now, 2 weeks later, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Her soft gasps, the way her fingers had clung to him, the way her absence had hollowed out the house, and worse, the way Kevin had changed. His son was still quiet, still withdrawn. And every time Kazimir looked into those sad little eyes, guilt twisted deep in his gut. Emotion does not care. He'd told himself that before. Oh, but what he hadn't told himself, what he hadn't dared to admit, was that he missed her. Not just her laughter with Kevin, not just her warmth in the house, He missed her, the girl who had somehow cracked the ice around his heart in a matter of weeks. And no matter how hard he tried to deny it, the truth would not be buried. Hazel wiped her tears and drew a slow, shaky breath. Enough was enough. She couldn't hide anymore. She would go to him, face him, tell him the truth about the night, about the triplets, about everything. Whatever his reaction, whatever the fallout, it was time. For her, for the babies, and for the fragile piece of her heart that still foolishly longed for him. The next morning dawned gray and misty, the Lagos skyline hidden beneath a veil of clouds. Hazel stood in front of her wardrobe, heart pounding as she tried to steady her shaking hands. Today, she would go to him. Her stomach churned, not from the morning sickness that had now become all too familiar, but from fear. What would he say? Would he accuse her of plotting, of trapping him? Would he even believe her? She pressed a trembling hand over her belly. 3 lives, tiny heartbeats that depended on her to be strong now. She owed them this truth. And so, despite the fear clawing at her chest, Hazel dressed carefully, a soft blue maternity dress that skimmed her still slim frame, her hair pulled back into a neat twist. She glanced at her reflection one last time. "You can do this," she whispered. Then she grabbed her bag and stepped out into the cool morning. By the time her cab pulled through the familiar iron gates of the Khalifa estate, Hazel's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The mansion loomed before her, tall, elegant, intimidating as ever. But it wasn't the marble floors or gilded staircases that made her knees weak. It was the thought of seeing him, of facing those cold eyes and telling him what he never expected to hear. The housekeeper answered the door, her expression a mixture of surprise and relief. "Miss Hazel, it is good to see you." Hazel managed a faint smile. Is he home?" The woman nodded. "Yes, in his study." Hazel swallowed hard. "May I see him?" The housekeeper hesitated only a moment, then stepped aside. "Of course." As Hazel walked through the grand halls, her pulse quickened with each step. Memories flooded her: Kevin's laughter in the garden, the warmth of his tiny arms around her neck. And that night, the way Kazimir had touched her, kissed her, broken down every wall she had built around her heart. Outside the study door, Hazel paused, forcing a deep breath into her lungs. Then, before fear could overtake her, she raised her hand and knocked. "Come in." His voice, deep, sharp, unmistakable. Hazel pushed the door open and stepped inside. Kazimir looked up from his desk, and for a moment, the mask slipped. Shock flickered in his eyes. She stood before him, her chin raised, though her heart trembled beneath the surface. For a beat, neither spoke. The silence stretched heavy between them. Then finally, Kazimir rose from his chair, dark eyes narrowing slightly. "You're here." Hazel swallowed. "Yes, I needed to see you." His jaw tensed. "You've been gone 3 weeks, Hazel. No explanation, no word." Her voice shook. I didn't know how to. Not after what happened." A shadow crossed his face. His gaze flicked down as if noticing her softer curves, the faint change in her body. He said nothing. So Hazel drew a deep breath and stepped closer. "I didn't come here to argue, Kazimir. I came because there's something you need to know." Still, he remained silent, unreadable. Hazel's heart ached at his coldness. But this wasn't about her pride. She had to tell him. For the babies. She reached into her bag and pulled out the envelope, the scanned photo from the clinic, her trembling fingers brushing the edge. She placed it on his desk and pushed it toward him. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. The words seemed to echo in the grand silent room. Kazimir stiffened, dark eyes locked on hers. But before he could speak, she added, voice breaking now. "Not just with one child, with 3. A sharp breath left him. His gaze dropped to the envelope, to the clear image of 3 tiny forms, side by side. Triplets. For a long moment, Kazimir said nothing. Hazel's throat tightened painfully. I didn't plan this, she whispered. I didn't trap you, Kazimir. I swear, I didn't even know. Until after you stopped speaking to me. Still he stood frozen, one hand clenched at his side, the other trembling faintly on the edge of the desk. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. Triplets. Hazel nodded, eyes glistening with unshed tears. Yes. For the first time in weeks, the cold mask cracked. Kazimir turned away, one hand dragging through his hair in a rare, unguarded gesture. Emotion warred in his expression, shock, disbelief, and something deeper. A storm he could no longer contain. Finally, he turned back to her voice, low, rough. You should have come to me sooner. Tears spilled down Hazel's cheeks. I was scared. You made it clear that night meant nothing to you. I thought you hated me. A long silence fell. Then with a slow breath, Kazimir stepped around the desk closer now. So close she could see the torment in his eyes. I never hated you, Hazel, he said quietly. I hated myself for what I did to you, for what I took. Her breath caught. Kazimir, but he shook his head, gaze fierce now. I don't know what this means, or what happens next. But those babies, they are mine. His voice trembled on the last word. And I will not let you face this alone. Hazel's heart broke, then the last of her defenses crumbling. Because behind all his coldness, she saw the man he truly was, wounded, grieving, but capable of love if only he would let himself feel it. Without thinking, she stepped into his arms. And for the first time in weeks, Kazimir held her. Not with desire, not with desperation, but with something deeper, something that just might become love. The days after that meeting unfolded in a way Hazel could never have imagined. She had expected rejection, coldness, a demand that she disappear quietly from his world. What she hadn't expected was his determination. Kazimir called the very next morning. Pack your things, his deep voice said simply. You're moving back here, immediately. And though her heart trembled with uncertainty, Hazel knew she couldn't refuse. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the babies, about Kevin, and though she hardly dared admit it, about the man she couldn't stop loving. The grand estate on Banana Island hadn't changed, but something inside it had. The moment Hazel stepped through the heavy oak doors, she felt a shift in the air. Less cold, less hollow, because he was there, waiting. Kazimir stood in the marble foyer, dressed in a crisp black suit, hands in his pockets. But there was no mask today, only weary eyes, tension in his jaw. And beneath it all, something raw. When their eyes met, Hazel's breath caught. No words passed between them. But in that charged silence, so much was said. The housekeeper led Hazel to her new room, larger, warmer, tucked in the east wing near Kevin's nursery. A subtle message. She wasn't just here as an employee anymore. Later that afternoon, as she unpacked, a soft knock came at the door. Hazel opened it to find Kazimir standing there tall, uncertain. May I? She nodded silently, stepping aside. He entered, gaze sweeping the room. Then after a long breath, he turned to her. You should have everything you need, he said. If anything is missing, tell me. Hazel hesitated, heart racing. Thank you, Kazimir. A flicker passed through his eyes at the sound of his name, soft, intimate on her lips. For the next few days, an odd rhythm settled over the house. Not tense, but not entirely easy either. Kazimir remained distant, at times quiet, brooding. But whenever Hazel entered the room, his gaze would follow her, dark, protective. And every evening he checked in on her. How are you feeling? Do you need anything? Are the babies well? The questions came simply, but the concern in his voice was unmistakable. With Kevin, too, Kazimir began to change. The boy brightened almost overnight at Hazel's return. His giggles filled the nursery again. his tiny arms wrapped around her neck with fierce hugs. And at night, when Kazimir thought no one was watching, he would linger in the doorway, eyes soft, gaze fixed on his son. One evening, Hazel found him alone in the garden, staring out at the moonlit sky. She hesitated at first, but something in his posture, the weight in his shoulders, drew her forward. Softly, she approached. "Kazimir." He turned, and for once there was no steel in his gaze, only weariness. "I never wanted this life for you," he said quietly. Hazel's heart ached. "Kazimir, it's not a mistake." His jaw tensed. "You don't understand. After Amara, I closed that part of me. I told myself I would never feel again." She stepped closer. "But you do feel. I see it in the way you look at Kevin, in the way you care about these babies." His breath shuddered. Emotion warred in his eyes. Then softly, "I'm trying, Hazel. I don't know if I can be the man you deserve, but I swear I will protect you and them." Tears pricked Hazel's eyes. "That's all I need, Kazimir. Just let me in." For a moment, they stood beneath the stars, two broken souls finding their way. And though neither said the word aloud, in that quiet moment, something new was born. Not obligation, not guilt, but the first fragile roots of love. The weeks passed in a strange, beautiful blur. Hazel's pregnancy blossomed, her belly growing rounder by the day. And with each passing moment, the icy mansion slowly transformed. Not with grand gestures, not with declarations, but with quiet moments, subtle changes, a softness blooming where there had once been only cold stone and silence. Kazimir changed first in small ways. He began having breakfast in the family sunroom, a place he'd never set foot in since Amar's death. He would linger longer at Kevin's playtimes, watching his son with eyes full of unspoken emotion. And in the evenings, after the boy was tucked into bed, he would seek Hazel out in the garden. On the balcony, sometimes just standing quietly in her doorway. Never pressing, never demanding, but always there, a silent promise that he was no longer running. Hazel felt the difference most in his gaze. Gone was the cold CEO who had once ruled the tower of Khalifa Studios with an iron will. In his place was a man truly trying to open his heart again. For Kevin, for her, and for the three little lives soon to enter their world. By her 5th month, Hazel could no longer hide her changing shape beneath soft dresses. And one warm afternoon, as she stood in the nursery sorting tiny baby clothes, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned, heart fluttering. Kazimir stood there, tall and still, his dark gaze fixed on her rounded belly. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, to her shock, he stepped forward, slowly, and placed one broad hand gently against her stomach. A small kick greeted him. Kazimir's breath caught. His eyes, once so guarded, filled with wonder. "Our children," he whispered. Hazel's heart swelled. "Yes." He looked up then, gaze locking with hers, fierce, raw, unguarded. And in that look, she knew. The walls had finally fallen. From that moment on, Kazimir became a different man. He accompanied Hazel to every doctor's appointment, silent but fiercely attentive, his strong hand always steadying her elbow. He began organizing the house for the arrival of the triplets, converting rooms, hiring specialists, overseeing every detail personally. And at night, when the aches of pregnancy grew too much, he would sit by her side, massaging her feet with surprising tenderness. One particularly late evening, Hazel awoke from a restless nap to find him sitting quietly in the nursery, assembling a crib. Sweat dampened his brow. Tools scattered across the floor. But in his hands, careful and deliberate, he worked. For their children. For the family he was no longer afraid to claim. Weeks later, as the sun dipped low over Banana Island, casting a golden glow across the estate gardens, Kazimir and Hazel sat together beneath the bougainvillea. Kevin played happily in the grass nearby, his giggles filling the warm air. Kazimir reached for Hazel's hand, his grip firm and sure. "I was a fool," he said softly, to shut you out, to think I could live without this, without you. Tears shimmered in Hazel's eyes. You don't have to say anything, Kazimir. But he shook his head, gaze fierce. I do, because I nearly lost the best thing that's ever happened to me. His free hand moved to rest gently on her swollen belly. I will protect you, love you, and be the man you deserve. Hazel's heart overflowed, and with a soft smile she whispered, You already are. That night, as the city lights sparkled beyond the horizon, a new chapter began for them both. Not as CEO and nanny, not as broken souls bound by guilt, but as a family, reborn. The early morning sun cast soft golden rays across the polished floors of the private hospital suite. Kazimir paced the length of the room, tall frame taut with tension. Hazel's labor had started in the dark hours before dawn, and though her doctors assured him everything was progressing well, he couldn't stop the restless energy surging through him. Outside the suite, the best team of obstetricians in Lagos stood ready. Nothing had been left to chance. He had made certain of it. Because these children, his children, meant more to him than anything in the world. Kevin sat curled on the plush couch, thumb tucked in his mouth, wide eyes watching his father anxiously. Daddy? Kazimir stilled at the soft voice, a sound he never tired of hearing. Yes, Kevin? Hazel, okay? Kazimir swallowed hard. She's strong, son. She'll be okay. But even as he spoke, his gaze slid toward the door. Toward the woman who had changed everything. He still remembered that first night, the night he had lost control. He had thought it a mistake, a slip in his grief, a crack in the fortress he'd built around his heart. But the truth, Hazel had saved him. Her quiet strength, her love for Kevin, her courage in the face of his coldness. She had melted the ice that had bound him for so long. And now, he would move heaven and earth for her. For the family they were building. The door opened suddenly. A nurse stepped out, eyes bright. Mr. Khalifa, it's time. She's ready. Kazimir's breath caught. Daddy? Kevin whispered. Kazimir knelt quickly, cupping his son's small face. You stay here with Auntie Grace, he said softly. I'll bring you good news soon, I promise. Kevin nodded bravely. Kazimir rose, squaring his shoulders. Then he strode into the delivery room. Hazel lay on the hospital bed, sweat dampening her brow, her breath coming in shallow gasps. But when her eyes met his deep, shimmering with fierce determination, something inside him surged. Pride. Love. A protective instinct so strong it nearly brought him to his knees. He moved to her side, taking her trembling hand in his. I'm here, he whispered. I've got you. She squeezed his fingers weakly, tears pooling in her eyes. Kazimir. I'm scared. His heart clenched. You're the strongest woman I know, he murmured. You can do this. For them. For us. The next hours passed in a blur. Kazimir never left her side. He wiped her brow, held her hand, whispered words of encouragement between contractions. And when the first tiny cry pierced the air, his breath caught in his throat. A girl. Their first daughter. Small. Perfect. Hazel sobbed with relief as they laid the swaddled baby against her chest. But there was no time to linger. The second child followed swiftly. A boy, this time red-faced and squalling, full of life. And then, moments later, the third. Another boy, smaller, but healthy, his tiny fists waving in the air. Kazimir stood frozen, awestruck, as the three newborns were placed gently in bassinets beside the bed. Three perfect little beings. Their children, his family. Tears blurred his vision as he leaned down, pressing a reverent kiss to Hazel's damp forehead. You were incredible, he whispered hoarsely. She smiled weakly, exhaustion in her eyes, but also joy. They're here, she whispered. They're really here. Kazimir's throat tightened. Yes, and they're beautiful, just like their mother. Hours later, after the doctors had finished their checks and the room had quieted, Kazimir returned to the waiting suite with 3 tiny bundles, cradled carefully in his arms. Kevin looked up, eyes wide. "Babies," he whispered. Kazimir knelt before his son, lowering the bundles so Kevin could see. "Your brother, your sister, and another brother," he said softly. "You're a big brother now, Kevin." Kevin's small mouth formed a perfect O. Then slowly, with great care, he reached out and touched one tiny hand. "Mine?" Kazimir's chest swelled. "Ours, son. All of ours." Later that night, as the city lights twinkled far below, Kazimir stood by the hospital window. Hazel resting peacefully in bed, the triplets asleep in their bassinets, Kevin curled beside his mother. And for the first time in years, peace filled his heart. He was no longer the cold, grieving man who had shut himself away. He was a father, a partner. And with Hazel by his side, he finally had the one thing he'd thought lost forever: a family, reborn. Thank you for watching Hazel and Kazimir's journey, a story of love breaking through loss, of a cold heart learning to love again, and of a nanny who gave not just life, but family, to a man who thought he had nothing left. Because sometimes, life's biggest surprises become its greatest blessings. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to follow, like, and share. More heartwarming billionaire romances are on the way. Dear viewers, what lesson did you take away from this dramatic tale? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.